Deep in the heart of the ancient forest, hidden from prying eyes, lay the lair of Alicia, a witch whose beauty was as eternal as it was deceptive. Alicia had lived for centuries, her ageless face a mask that hid the darkness within. She had discovered a powerful spell that granted her youth and vitality, but it came at a terrible cost. To maintain her beauty and power, she needed the essence of young, lonely men, and the willing sacrifices of women desperate for anything. Jack was an ordinary young man, living a life of quiet solitude. At 25, he had moved to a small, isolated town to escape the chaos of the city and the painful memories of a broken relationship. Jack was tall and lean, with an introspective nature that made him seem older than his years. He worked as a freelance writer, his days filled with the tap-tap of keys and the glow of his computer screen. Jack's life was lonely, but he preferred it that way. He found solace in his routines and the tranquility of the countryside. Little did he know that his solitude had made him the perfect target for Alicia's dark desires. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack decided to take a walk to clear his mind. The forest near his home was his favorite place, a haven of peace and quiet. As he wandered deeper into the woods, he felt an inexplicable pull, as if an unseen force was guiding him. He stumbled upon a clearing he had never seen before. In the center stood a small, charming cottage, its windows glowing warmly. Drawn by curiosity, Jack approached and knocked on the door. The door creaked open, and Jack was greeted by a woman of extraordinary beauty. Her long, raven-black hair framed a face of perfect symmetry, with piercing green eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. She wore a simple dress that clung to her slender frame, accentuating her ethereal grace. "Hello," she said, her voice like honey. "I'm Alicia. What brings you here, stranger?" Jack stammered, feeling a strange mix of fear and fascination. "I was just walking. I didn't mean to intrude." "Nonsense," Alicia smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "Please, come in. You must be hungry." As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself returning to Alicia's cottage more and more often. She was enchanting, her presence intoxicating. They spent hours talking, and Alicia seemed genuinely interested in his life and work. Jack, who had always felt invisible, was flattered by her attention. Alicia, however, had other plans. She had chosen Jack for a reason. His loneliness made him vulnerable, and his essence would sustain her for years. But she needed more than just his life force. She needed a willing accomplice, someone desperate enough to help her carry out her dark ritual. Emily was a woman who had lost everything. Once a successful businesswoman, she had fallen on hard times. Her family had turned their backs on her, and she felt abandoned by the world. Desperate for a change, she was willing to try anything to reclaim her life and power. One day, while wandering the same forest where Jack had met Alicia, Emily encountered the witch. Alicia recognized the despair in Emily's eyes and saw an opportunity. "I can help you," Alicia said, her voice soothing. "I can give you everything you desire, but you must be willing to make a sacrifice." Emily, her spirit broken and her heart hardened, agreed without hesitation. She was ready to do whatever it took to regain her lost glory. The night of the ritual arrived. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the forest as Alicia prepared her potion. Jack, unaware of the impending danger, sat by the fire, captivated by Alicia's beauty. Emily stood nearby, her eyes empty of emotion. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. Alicia began to chant. her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. Jack felt a strange drowsiness overcome him. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground. As Jack lay helpless, Alicia approached, a sinister smile on her lips. She placed her hands on his chest, and he felt a cold, burning sensation as his life force began to drain away. Emily watched in silence, her heart pounding. She knew what she had to do. She stepped forward, a dagger in her hand, and plunged it into Jack's chest. His eyes widened in shock and pain before closing forever. Alicia's body glowed with a radiant light as she absorbed Jack's essence. Her beauty was restored, and her power intensified. She turned to Emily, who stood trembling with the bloody dagger in her hand. "You have done well," Alicia said, her voice filled with dark satisfaction. "Now, you will receive your reward." Emily felt a surge of power course through her veins. Her mind cleared, and her strength returned. She looked at Alicia with a mix of awe and fear. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. Alicia smiled, but it was a cold, calculating smile. "Remember, you are bound to me now. Our fates are intertwined. Do not forget that." Years passed, and Emily's life improved dramatically. She regained her wealth and power, but the cost of her success weighed heavily on her soul. She was haunted by nightmares of Jack's final moments and the dark pact she had made with Alicia. Meanwhile, Alicia continued to thrive, her beauty and power undiminished. She found new targets, luring them into her web of deceit and darkness. But she never forgot Emily, her most willing and desperate accomplice. One night, as Emily lay in bed, she heard a whisper in the darkness. "Emily," the voice hissed, "you cannot escape." She bolted upright, her heart pounding. The room was empty, but the presence was unmistakable. Alicia's hold on her was unbreakable, and the witch's power continued to grow. The forest remained silent and foreboding, a place where few dared to venture. Alicia's cottage stood as a testament to her dark magic, hidden from the world but always waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. Emily's story was a warning, a tale of desperation and the high price of ambition. Alicia's power was eternal, and as long as there were those willing to sacrifice everything for a taste of glory, the witch would remain unstoppable. And so, the cycle continued, an endless dance of darkness and desire, with Alicia at its center, forever young, forever beautiful, and forever haunting the shadows of the ancient forest. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. When I first moved into the quaint neighborhood of Brookfield, I was eager for a fresh start. The charming houses, tree-lined streets, and friendly neighbors made it seem like the perfect place to leave behind my troubled past. I quickly settled into my new routine, making a few acquaintances and finding comfort in the community's peaceful atmosphere. One of my closest neighbors was Mr. Hawthorne, an elderly gentleman who lived in the large Victorian house next door. He was a kind man with a penchant for storytelling, often inviting me over for tea and sharing tales of the neighborhood's history. His house was a treasure trove of antiques, each with its own story. But the one item that always caught my eye was an ornate, gold-encrusted mirror that hung in the living room. The mirror was beautiful, its intricate frame adorned with delicate carvings and gemstones that sparkled in the light. Mr. Hawthorne told me it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. He spoke of it with a mix of pride and reverence, always emphasizing its importance to his family. One evening, as we sat sipping tea, Mr. Hawthorne leaned in and lowered his voice. "There's something you should know about that mirror, Jack," he said, his eyes reflecting a hint of fear. "It's not just a piece of art, it holds a deadly secret." I was intrigued and urged him to explain. He hesitated, then began his story. According to Mr. Hawthorne, the mirror had been in his family for centuries. It was said to be cursed, a vessel for an ancient and malevolent spirit. Legend had it that anyone who looked into the mirror for too long would be driven to madness, haunted by visions of their darkest fears and deepest regrets. Some even claimed the spirit could possess those who gazed into it, using them to carry out its sinister deeds. At first, I dismissed it as a mere legend, a ghost story meant to entertain. But Mr. Hawthorne's demeanor was deadly serious. "It's not just a story, Jack. I've seen what it can do. My grandfather, he was found dead in front of that mirror, his eyes wide open, as if he'd seen something unimaginable." A shiver ran through me, and I couldn't help but glance at the mirror, its surface gleaming ominously in the dim light. "Why keep it then?" I asked. Mr. Hawthorne sighed. "It's a family curse. We can't destroy it, and we can't get rid of it. It always finds its way back. The best we can do is keep it hidden and warn others of its power." Despite the warnings, my curiosity got the better of me. One night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, its surface reflecting my own anxious expression. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I stared into the mirror, my reflection staring back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I saw something move behind me. A shadowy figure, its features indistinct. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. My heart raced, and I stepped back, reminding myself of Mr. Hawthorne's warning. But it was too late. I'd already looked into the mirror for too long. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would catch glimpses of the shadowy figure in the corner of my eye, always disappearing when I turned to look. At night, I heard whispers, soft and unintelligible, coming from the direction of the mirror. Sleep became elusive, my dreams plagued by nightmarish visions of the figure standing over me, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire. I confided in Mr. Hawthorne, but he could offer little comfort. "The spirit has taken an interest in you," he said grimly. "You must resist its influence. Do not look into the mirror again." But the mirror seemed to have a will of its own. I would find myself drawn to it, standing in front of it without realizing how I got there. Each time, the figure would be closer, its features becoming clearer. It was a woman, her face twisted in anguish and rage, her eyes hollow and dark. One night, I woke to find myself standing in front of the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with an intensity that felt unnatural. The woman's face appeared behind mine, her eyes locking onto mine through the glass. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Her voice filled my mind, a cacophony of pain and anger. "Free me," she whispered. "Free me from this prison." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and the room spun around me. When I regained my senses, I was no longer in my living room. I was inside the mirror, looking out at my own reflection, which now wore a malevolent smile. The woman stepped forward, taking my place in the real world. I was trapped, a prisoner in the glass, helpless as she moved freely, her laughter echoing in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and I watched in horror as the woman, now in my body, sowed chaos in the neighborhood. She visited Mr. Hawthorne, taunting him with my voice, reveling in his confusion and fear. She seemed to thrive on the misery she caused, feeding off the darkness within her. Desperate, I tried to communicate with Mr. Hawthorne, but my voice was lost in the void. I could only watch as he grew more and more frail, the stress taking its toll on his health. Then, one night, she made a mistake. She stood in front of the mirror, gloating over her victory. In a moment of defiance, I reached out with all my willpower, causing a crack to form on the surface. She recoiled, startled, and I knew I had found a way to fight back. With renewed determination, I waited for my chance. The woman continued her reign of terror, but she couldn't resist the lure of the mirror. Each time she looked into it, I focused all my energy on breaking the glass. One fateful night, the crack spread further, and she screamed in rage. "You cannot escape," she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. But I didn't stop. I pushed harder, feeling the barrier between us weaken. The mirror began to tremble, the crack splintering into a web of fractures. "Enough," she cried, lunging at the mirror. But it was too late. With a final, desperate effort, I shattered the glass, and the room was filled with blinding light. When the light faded, I found myself back in my living room, gasping for breath. The mirror lay in pieces on the floor, its curse finally broken. I was free, or so I thought. As I looked around, I realized something was terribly wrong. The room felt colder, darker. Shadows danced on the walls, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. I glanced at the broken mirror and saw the woman's face staring back at me from the shards. "You freed me," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "But now, you're trapped here, forever." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't broken the curse. I'd only swapped places with her. She was free, and I was now the prisoner, condemned to an eternity of torment within the shattered pieces of the mirror. And, as the darkness closed in around me, I knew there was no escape from the horror I had unleashed. It's time for the third story of the night. The Haunted Road Trip. I had always been a sucker for spontaneous adventures, and a road trip with my best friends, Emma and Ryan, seemed like the perfect escape from our mundane lives. We had no destination in mind, just a map, a tank full of gas, and a spirit of adventure. Little did we know, this trip would take us down a path we could never have imagined. We packed the essentials: food, drinks, a tent for camping, and a playlist of our favorite tunes. The plan was to head south, explore some scenic routes, and find a spot to camp each night. The first day was smooth, filled with laughter and good vibes as we drove through picturesque landscapes and quaint towns. As night fell, we decided to find a place to set up camp. We took a detour off the main highway, guided by a sign that promised a campground a few miles ahead. The road became narrow and winding, the trees on either side forming a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. It was eerie, but also exciting, like we were entering a forgotten world. The campground was deserted, which wasn't entirely surprising given the remote location. We set up our tent, built a fire, and settled in for the night. As we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, a sense of unease began to creep in. The woods around us were silent, too silent. There were no sounds of wildlife, just an oppressive stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Ryan, always the joker, started telling a ghost story about a haunted road that led to a forgotten town. "They say anyone who takes that road at night never returns," he said, his face lit by the flickering flames. "The spirits of those who died there are said to wander the woods, looking for lost souls to join them. Emma laughed it off, but I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes. I felt it too. We decided to call it a night, hoping a good night's sleep would shake off the unease. But sleep was elusive. I kept hearing faint whispers, like voices carried on the wind, and the feeling of being watched was palpable. The next morning, we decided to continue our journey. But as we packed up, we realized something strange. The road we had taken to get to the campground was gone. In its place was a narrow dirt path that twisted deeper into the forest. Confused but undeterred, we decided to follow it, hoping it would lead us back to the main road. Hours passed, and the path grew more treacherous. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches forming an almost impenetrable barrier. Our GPS signal was gone, and our phones were useless. We were completely isolated. As dusk approached, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned town. The buildings were dilapidated, covered in vines and moss, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. It was like stepping back in time, to a place forgotten by the world. We decided to explore, thinking we might find someone who could help us. The town was eerily empty, not a single sign of life. As we walked through the streets, we found remnants of the past. Old photographs, rusted tools, and children's toys scattered in the dirt. It was as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry, abandoning everything. In the center of the town stood a church, its doors hanging off their hinges. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, we entered. The interior was dark and cold, the pews covered in dust. At the front, an altar held a single, unlit candle. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us and the candle burst into flame. We froze, a chill running through us. The air grew heavy, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "We need to leave," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. But the door wouldn't budge. We were trapped. Desperate to escape, we decided to find another way out. Ryan suggested we check one of the houses for tools. We chose the largest house, which stood at the edge of town, its windows boarded up and the front door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was stale and musty. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and shadows seemed to dance in the corners of the rooms. As we searched, we found more signs of the sudden abandonment. Half-eaten meals, clothes left in piles, and family portraits hanging crooked on the walls. In one of the bedrooms, we found a diary. The last entry was dated over 50 years ago and spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The writer mentioned a curse that had befallen the town, driving the residents to madness. As we read, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Panic set in, and we ran, stumbling down the stairs and out of the house. But outside, the town had changed. The streets were now filled with ghostly figures, their eyes hollow and lifeless. We ran blindly, the figures closing in around us. The forest seemed to come alive, the trees bending and twisting to block our path. It was as if the very landscape was conspiring against us. In the chaos, we were separated. I found myself alone, the shadows closing in. I stumbled into a clearing where an old well stood in the center. The whispers were deafening now, and a cold hand grasped my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Emma, her eyes wide with terror. "Jack, we need to get out of here," she cried. "Ryan, he's gone." We ran back to the church, hoping to find some sanctuary. The door, which had been stuck, now swung open easily. Inside, the candle was still burning, casting an eerie glow. As we approached the altar, a trap door opened beneath us, and we were plunged into darkness. We landed in a narrow tunnel, the walls damp and covered in mold. The air was suffocating, and the whispers were now replaced by distant screams. We had no choice but to move forward, the tunnel winding deeper into the earth. After what felt like hours, we emerged into a large cavern. In the center was a stone altar covered in strange symbols. Ryan was there, tied to the altar, his eyes filled with fear. Around him, ghostly figures chanted in a language we couldn't understand. As we approached, the figures turned their hollow eyes on us. The air grew colder, and the ground seemed to tremble. I grabbed a rock and swung at the ropes binding Ryan. As I did, the figures shrieked and lunged at us. We fought desperately, the figures swarming around us. It was like fighting shadows, our blows passing through them with little effect. But we didn't give up. Together, we managed to free Ryan, and we ran, the figures close behind. We found another tunnel and followed it, the air growing warmer as we went. Finally, we emerged into the forest, the town nowhere in sight. But our ordeal wasn't over. The whispers had followed us, and the trees seemed to shift and move, guiding us back toward the town. In a final, desperate bid for freedom, we ran toward the highway, the road appearing through the trees. As we reached it, the whispers stopped, and the oppressive weight lifted. We were free, or so we thought. As we caught our breath, a car pulled up, and a kind-looking woman offered us a ride. We gratefully accepted, climbing into the back seat. But as the car started moving, I noticed something strange. The woman's eyes, reflected in the rearview mirror, were hollow and lifeless. I turned to Emma and Ryan, but they were staring straight ahead, their expressions blank. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and I realized with a sinking feeling that we hadn't escaped at all. The road stretched out before us, leading us back to the town. The woman's eerie smile, the last thing I saw before the darkness closed in. We were trapped, forever bound to the haunted road and the cursed town. Our adventure had turned into a nightmare, one from which there was no waking. Now, let's dive into the fourth creepy story. I moved into the quiet suburb of Maplewood, seeking solace from the chaos of city life. The streets were lined with charming houses, each with well-kept lawns and friendly faces. It was the perfect place to start fresh. I settled into my new routine, enjoying the peace and quiet. But that peace was soon shattered by unsettling events that made me question my safety and sanity. It all started innocently enough. My neighbor, Mr. Gerald, introduced himself the day I moved in. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 50s, with a warm smile and a polite demeanor. He lived alone in the house next door, and while he seemed friendly, there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Mr. Gerald was a retired librarian who seemed to have a fondness for gardening. He would often be seen tending to his roses, his eyes always watching, observing. Despite his friendly demeanor, there was an unsettling intensity in his gaze, a quiet scrutiny that made my skin crawl. One night, I woke up to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, a faint creaking sound coming from downstairs. My heart pounded as I crept out of bed and down the stairs. The house was dark and silent, but I could feel a presence, a sense of being watched. I checked the doors and windows, but everything was locked. Maybe it was just the house settling, I told myself. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing odd things around the house. items would be moved or misplaced. Doors that I was sure I had closed would be open, and sometimes I would find footprints on the freshly cleaned floor. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I couldn't shake the sense of unease that settled over me. I mentioned it to a few neighbors, but they brushed it off. Maplewood is the safest place you could live, they assured me. But I couldn't ignore the signs. Something was definitely wrong. One evening, I decided to install a few hidden cameras around the house. If someone was breaking in, I wanted to catch them in the act. I spent the night watching the footage, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. It was frustrating and unsettling, but I wasn't ready to give up. A few nights later, I was awoken by the sound of creaking again. This time, it was closer, louder. I grabbed my phone and quietly crept downstairs, my heart racing. As I reached the living room, I saw a shadow moving in the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure turned, and in the faint moonlight streaming through the window, I recognized Mr. Gerald. My friendly neighbor was standing in my living room, rummaging through my belongings. My blood ran cold as I realized the extent of his intrusion. "Mr. Gerald?" I called out, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his expression calm and unsettlingly composed. "Ah, Tom," he said, as if we were meeting on the street for a casual chat. "I didn't mean to startle you." "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. He smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver through me. "Just checking on you, making sure everything is all right." My mind raced. This man had been breaking into my house for who knows how long, watching me, moving my things. The realization was horrifying. I wanted to call the police, but something in Mr. Gerald's demeanor made me hesitate. He seemed too calm, too sure of himself. Instead, I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving him. "I think you should leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step toward me, his smile widening. "Oh, Tom, you don't understand. I'm just looking out for you. You're new here, after all." I felt a surge of panic. "Get out of my house," I said more forcefully. He shrugged and turned toward the door. "As you wish, but remember, Tom, I'm always watching." I locked the door behind him, my hands shaking. The police arrived within minutes, but there was no sign of Mr. Gerald. They took my statement, but without any concrete evidence, there was little they could do. They advised me to stay vigilant and keep my doors locked. The following days were a nightmare. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I checked the cameras constantly, but Mr. Gerald was too clever. He knew how to avoid them, how to make me doubt my own sanity. Then came the night that changed everything. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard the unmistakable sound of my front door opening. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was in my house. I could hear footsteps coming up the stairs, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited, the minutes stretching into an eternity. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, my eyes locked on the door. It slowly creaked open, and Mr. Gerald stepped inside, a knife gleaming in his hand. I backed up against the wall, my phone slipping from my grasp. Mr. Gerald's smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold determination. "Tom, Tom, Tom," he said softly, his voice a sinister whisper. "I told you I was watching. You should have listened." He advanced toward me, and I knew I had to do something. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged at him, grabbing his wrist and trying to wrestle the knife from his grip. We struggled, crashing into furniture, my desperation giving me strength. Finally, I managed to knock the knife from his hand. It skittered across the floor, and I scrambled to grab it. Mr. Gerald lunged at me, but I swung the knife wildly, catching him across the arm. He screamed in pain, and I took the opportunity to run. I bolted out of the house, my heart pounding. I could hear Mr. Gerald behind me, his footsteps heavy and determined. The night was dark, and the streetlights cast eerie shadows that danced around me. I made it to a neighbor's house and banged on the door, screaming for help. Lights flicked on, and the door opened to reveal a shocked and sleepy neighbor. I burst inside, slamming the door behind me just as Mr. Gerald reached the porch. The police arrived moments later, and Mr. Gerald was finally arrested. They found a hidden room in his house filled with surveillance equipment, photos, and detailed notes about my every move. It was clear that he had been stalking me for months, planning something far more sinister than just breaking and entering. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews and therapy sessions. Mr. Gerald was charged with multiple counts of breaking and entering, stalking, and attempted murder. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a long prison term. But the horror of what I had experienced never truly left me. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected noise brought back the terror of that night. I moved away from Maplewood, seeking solace in a new town, but the scars remained. Months passed, and I slowly began to rebuild my life. But then, one evening, I received a package. It was unmarked, with no return address. Inside was a small, unassuming box. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I found a series of photographs. My heart stopped as I realized they were of me, in my new home, going about my daily life. A note accompanied the photos, written in a familiar, neat script. "You thought it was over, Tom, but I'm always watching." I dropped the note, my hands trembling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Mr. Gerald wasn't working alone. Someone else was out there, continuing his twisted game. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I heard a noise. A faint creaking sound, just like the one that had started it all. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to hear. The noise grew louder, closer. Suddenly, the bedroom door burst open with a deafening crash. I screamed, scrambling to the far side of the bed, my eyes wide with terror. Standing in the doorway was a figure, their face hidden in shadow, but the voice was unmistakable. "Did you miss me, Tom?" It was Mr. Gerald. The realization hit me. He had escaped. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. How could he be here? How did he find me? He stepped into the room, the gleam of a knife catching the light. I was trapped, no way out. As he advanced, I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and swung it with all my might. The lamp shattered, but it barely slowed him down. In that moment, I knew there was no escaping this nightmare. Mr. Gerald's twisted game wasn't over. It had only just begun. We've made it to the last story of the night. This final tale is the scariest one yet, guaranteed to give you chills. I've always been a thrill seeker. The rush of living on the edge, the high of recklessness. That's where I felt truly alive. Rick and I had been chasing that high for months, blowing money on bars, gambling, and a string of bad decisions. We were deep in debt, and the only way out seemed like one last big score. That's how we ended up here, creeping through the woods toward Dr. Albert Crane's mansion. The mansion loomed ahead, a dark, brooding structure surrounded by an expanse of trees. The cool night air was filled with the rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Rick looked nervous, his eyes darting around as we approached the front door. I felt a twinge of doubt myself, but shoved it aside. We were in too deep now. Breaking into the house was easier than I expected. The door yielded to the crowbar with a satisfying groan, and we slipped inside. The interior was everything I'd hoped for, luxurious, pristine, and untouched. The thrill of it all made me forget my worries. We moved quickly, grabbing everything of value we could find. Gold jewelry, expensive electronics, and even a few priceless-looking paintings. I was feeling a mix of adrenaline and greed, but as we prepared to leave, something felt off. Rick was fiddling with the front door, his frustration growing. It was stuck, and the realization hit me like a punch. We were locked in. Rick and I tried everything to get out. I banged on the door, but it didn't budge. The house was a maze of shadows, each turn revealing another room full of ominous silence. I could hear faint, unsettling noises. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe something was moving in the dark. My heart raced as a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Suddenly, I noticed a faint, acrid smell. Smoke was curling up from vents in the floor, and within moments the room was filled with a thick haze. My breathing grew labored, and my vision blurred. I tried to stay conscious, but the smoke was too much. Everything faded to black. When I came to, I was disoriented. The room was now illuminated by a harsh, sterile light. My head was pounding, and the smell of smoke lingered in my nostrils. As my vision cleared, I saw that we were in a cold, clinical room. Metal trays covered with surgical instruments surrounded us, and the walls were adorned with disturbing photographs of disfigured bodies and grotesque experiments. My stomach churned as I realized what kind of place we had stumbled into. Rick was next to me, his face pale with fear. He was struggling to sit up, his eyes darting around the room. The silence was broken by a smooth, unsettling voice. "Welcome to my home," it said. Dr. Albert Crane emerged from the shadows, his lab coat stained with dark, ominous splatters. His calm demeanor was chillingly out of place. "I don't usually get visitors, but you've provided me with an excellent opportunity." Dr. Crane moved closer, and my pulse quickened. His eyes held a terrifying mix of curiosity and malice. He began to speak of his experiments and how he found human anatomy to be the perfect canvas for his twisted art. His words were surreal, each one painting a more horrifying picture of what he intended to do to us. As he approached with a gleaming scalpel, I felt an icy fear grip me. I glanced around desperately, and that's when I saw it, a syringe lying on one of the metal trays. It was our only chance. With a burst of adrenaline, I grabbed it and jabbed it into the doctor's arm. His reaction was immediate, a scream of rage and pain that echoed through the room. Crane stumbled back, his face contorted in agony as he fell among the scattered medical instruments. The noise was deafening, the clang of metal mixing with the doctor's cries. I seized the moment and pulled Rick toward the door. We ran through the house, the oppressive darkness pressing in on us. Every corner seemed to hide a new threat, and I could hear Crane's enraged voice chasing us, promising vengeance. We finally reached the front door, and with a desperate shove, I managed to force it open. The cool night air hit us like a slap, but there was no time to savor it. We fled into the woods, branches slapping against our faces as we ran. Just as I was starting to think we'd made it, the forest seemed to close in around us. The dense fog that rolled in felt almost tangible, wrapping around us like a shroud. My breathing was heavy, each step feeling like it took an eternity. Rick was panting beside me, his face ashen. Then, without warning, the fog parted momentarily to reveal a figure standing in our path. It was Dr. Crane. How had he found us so quickly? His eyes gleamed with a terrifying intensity, and the syringe was now a menacing part of his arsenal. Rick stumbled and fell, clutching his side. "Go!" he shouted, his voice breaking. I ran, but the forest seemed to shift and distort around me. The shadows grew longer, and I could hear Crane's footsteps growing closer. My heart pounded as I stumbled through the undergrowth. Just when I thought I'd lost him, a sharp pain struck my leg. One of Crane's traps had caught me. I fell, the darkness closing in. I managed to drag myself to my feet and kept moving, but every step felt like it was taking me further into a nightmare. The trees seemed to whisper in my ears, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl. Turning around, I saw Dr. Crane emerging from the fog, his face contorted into a grotesque grin. He was no longer alone. Surrounding him were creatures, twisted and malformed, their eyes glowing with a sickly light. They were like nightmares given flesh, their bodies a grotesque amalgamation of human and inhuman. Crane's laugh echoed through the forest, a chilling sound that sent my nerves into overdrive. He raised a syringe, but it was not aimed at me. The creatures surrounded Rick, who was barely conscious, and I could see them closing in on him. My mind screamed in terror as I realized what Crane had planned for us. Desperation surged through me. I had to save Rick. With a last burst of strength, I threw myself at Crane, grabbing for the syringe. He twisted away, but I managed to strike him, sending him crashing into the undergrowth. I took the syringe and fled, my mind a maelstrom of fear and adrenaline. I ran until I could run no more. Exhausted, I collapsed by the side of a road. The police found me hours later, disoriented and incoherent. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words were incoherent. They found the mansion abandoned, but there was no sign of Crane or his twisted creations. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Crane's grin and the creatures that had hunted us. The syringe lay on my bedside table, a constant reminder of the horrors I had escaped. I thought I was safe, but the nightmares never stopped. Every creak in the night, every shadow seemed to whisper that Dr. Crane was still out there, waiting for me. I had escaped his clutches, but I knew that the terror I had experienced was far from over. The horror had seeped into my life, a permanent reminder that some nightmares never truly end.